Yes, yes. Good morning to the east. Good morning to the west. Welcome again, everybody. Dr. Monikah Ogando here, your host for Thursday Spiritual Matters. I'm excited to be here with you today because we're going to be talking about something that, it doesn't lend itself to like a quick and easy. Do you remember like in the 70s and 80s, we used to have sitcoms, and sitcom is actually a portmanteau of two words, situational comedy, because that situational comedy used to present a conundrum that used to be resolved in 30 minutes or less, 22 minutes to be exact, if you count commercial breaks. And it used to just kind of like deliver in a pretty little ball. I remember growing up, I don't know, I'm maybe telling on myself, but I remember growing up in the 90s, I used to watch Family Matters. And what's the other one with Tanner, DJ Tanner? They were in San Francisco. What was that one? Full House. Full House. And so usually the kids would have a problem, and mom or dad, and in this case, all the dads, because it was a full house of men raising these children, they would come and, add their 2 cents, and then they would add perspective and wisdom, and everything would be solved in 22.3 minutes. And life doesn't work like that. So what do we tell when we have the conversation about, I create my life, I am the author of my own experiences? What do we tell the 14-year-old boy who in 1955 got dragged out of a relative's house and was stoned and murdered, and later on plastered on newspapers for the world to see? How did he create that experience, right? What do we tell the 5-year-old, the 6-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old, the journalist, the mother, the forlorn father who has lost all his family in Palestine because of some senseless bombing? And then folks try to argue for the entitlement that some others have to deny others the right to live. What do we tell people whose whole life has been spent on defending constitutional rights? I come from a very military family. Almost everybody in my family, in my immediate family, has been in the Navy. My daughter, my husband, my brother, etc. What do we tell people who have spent their lives defending the Constitution when somebody violates that right? Well, what do they do? How do they create that? Right? How do they author that experience? So these are the things that I grapple with. I don't know about you, but I grapple with these conversations because I coach people, and there's a very fine line between authoring your experience and acknowledging the external forces at play. They are not mutually exclusive arguments. And so you may not necessarily be in quote unquote control of a war, control of political movements or agenda. You may not necessarily be in control or author or create conflict, especially on a global geopolitical scale. But you can decide what you think about it, what you feel about it, what you are going to do about it, and what it's going to mean for you in your life. When I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, and unbeknownst to me, my parents were part of the quote unquote, I wouldn't call it ruling class, but they were doing pretty well. And, we lived a very comfortable life. And then the political tide changed in the Dominican Republic. And whereas they were on the up and up and highly favored, now because the political tides changed, now they were persona non grata. And the access or the good favor that they used to have, they no longer enjoyed. And so they started looking into, well, where can we make our children's lives easier, that it doesn't depend on whether somebody is in power or not, that it's really just up to us and an effort, et cetera, et cetera. And they decided to bring their children and their family to the United States because the propaganda and the brand of the American dream was that, you could just lift yourself up by your own bootstraps and you can make it. Kind of like, the larger conversation about if you can make it here, there, you can make it anywhere, like the New York song. And in many ways, that was true in the United States in a way that it wasn't in Dominican Republic. But it was just as false also. And it took my brother, my sister, and myself becoming first generation Dominican Americans in order for us to recognize that, in order for us to see that, because they as immigrants did not have access to that level of information and that level of nuance. They didn't go to public schools in the United States. They didn't go to college in the United States. They didn't get their high school job, volunteer job, or venture into student council or even city council or whatever, because they were just too busy putting food on the table with their blue collar work. And so there were nuances of American society that they just did not have access to. And I think that's a very important distinction for all of us here to make in terms of your spiritual journey. That there is some information, there is some perspective, there's some data that you do not have access to. And a lot of times in the absence of information, we tend to self-blame and self-direct. And somebody says in the chat, what do you tell a little person who was born to a little child who was born to an anxious, depressed mother and who had to become a mother at 7 years old, right? So we create these experiences, or we find ourselves in these experiences where we have to parentify and adultify a child, and they don't necessarily have access to their full childhood in that way for reasons beyond their control, right? And so that's the point that I'm making, that there's information that we don't have and perspective that we don't have access to. So that 7-year-old child in that example, Florence, that you mentioned in the chat, perhaps when they grow up to be 27, 37, 47, 57, has enough lived experience and perspective to know, oh, I was born to a mother who had some mental health challenges, or had some chemical imbalances, or had some trauma unresolved. And then that just kind of like bled over into other parts of her life, namely how she raised her children or how she didn't raise her children. But that's the 47-year-old's perspective. The 7-year-old perspective thinks mama doesn't love me, or mama isn't here for me, therefore nobody is here for me, or I have to do everything myself, therefore I cannot rely on people, etc. We make up these conclusions. This is why we always say here in the Daily Huddle, always audit your assumptions, check yourself before you wreck yourself, because some of those assumptions may have at some point have been useful coping skills or useful survival strategies. At some point they become irrelevant or even maladaptive, right? And so I want you to start thinking about the lived experience that you have had, and notice how it wasn't until you grew up, until you evolved, until you got more mature, until you had more information, that you understood that there were other forces at play, right? That you understood that there are many other things that you didn't know had their hand in a situation. Maybe there was substance abuse problems. Maybe there was unemployment, and in a moment of despair, then this person lashed out and became violent. But it wasn't because they were a violent person. They were acting out of desperation. How do you act when you get desperate? Do you get violent? Do you get petty? Right? And so that's an important perspective to have, or that's an important angle to consider when the next time that you go through an experience where you don't have all the information, where you may have been missing some perspective. This is what gives me pause, right? There are some times, there are some situations, there are some experiences where I'm like, if I take how you said that to me at face value, your life is at stake with me, okay? I'm going to choke you. But then I think, I sometimes am missing information. I don't know if this person had a bad day. I don't know if somebody just died on them. I don't know if this is just grief or sadness or despair acting out. I don't know if I did something. Imagine that. I don't know if I did something and they're acting out of hurt. They're not trying to hurt me. They're acting out of their own hurt. Who knows? And so that moment between the situation and your interpretation of the situation, in that moment, that little pause, you have access to an infinity of conclusions. And here at the Daily Huddle, because you're my friend, I am going to invite you to think, just like A Course in Miracles says, I am not upset for the reason I think I am. In the same way, she, he, they are not acting for the reason I think they are. Something else is at play here. When you give yourself the pause to allow for that possibility, you don't immediately jump to anger. You don't immediately jump to reactivity. You don't immediately jump to, well, F them, right? You don't immediately jump to dismissal of somebody else's experience. You then have access to curiosity. You then have access to empathy. You then have access to a pause before reaction. And I can't tell you how many relationships in my life, jobs, professional connections have been saved because of the pause. Pauses save lives. And so I want to encourage you to take on these three steps. I already mentioned the first one. The first one is to consider that the space between whatever happened and your interpretation or your reaction to it, consider that there's more going on than meets the eye, and give yourself that pause to become curious, to access empathy, to access curiosity and exploration and possibility. You might end up being reactionary. You might end up that your interpretation might be correct in that assumption. I'm not saying that it isn't. I'm just saying give yourself access to curiosity, exploration, and empathy, right? That's the first step, number one. Number two, in terms of like a strategy to actually navigate this, is ask yourself, and this goes more into critical thinking. I'm going to say something twice because I want you to hear it, and I want it to land. I heard someone say at some point earlier this week, your cognitive dissonance will shut down your critical thinking skills. Your cognitive dissonance will shut down your critical thinking skills. That means when you are looking at data, let's say, for example, you have an assumption that you are a good reader, all right, that you read well, that you know how to read, that you're literate, but then you see something, you start reading something and it doesn't make any sense. Your first thought is, oh, they must have spelled it wrong, or they didn't know how to say that right, and da da da. It isn't, maybe I'm missing something, right? There's a group of people who go into outer blame, and then there's a group of people that go into self-blame. All I'm saying is that cognitive dissonance shuts down your critical thinking skills. So the second step, after you give yourself that pause, is to ask, before you go to that natural conclusion of yours, whether it's external blame or internal blame, before you go there, ask yourself, who has a vested interest in me thinking that? Who benefits from this conclusion? This is an exercise that I've been doing with myself with the whole Israel-Palestine genocide that's going on overseas. Who has a vested interest in me thinking Palestine is the bad guy, or Israel is the bad guy, or the United States is the bad guy, or whoever gives so-and-so weapons is the bad? Who has a vested interest in this particular position? And why? Why would they want me to think that? Ask yourself that. Whether it's your parents, or whether it's your employer, or whether it's a client, whether it's a friend, whether it's your spouse, Who has a vested interest in me thinking a particular way? And why? Right? And then the third thing is, who do you say that you are? What do you say is going on? Besides just considering external forces, other perspectives, and who has a vested interest in it going one way or the other, what do you say? How do you want it to go? Because that's also where you can, sorry, I have something in my face and I can't get rid of it. That's where you get to decide your own values, and you get to decide what kind of game you're playing. We have, as human beings, a very hard time acknowledging and making peace with the fact that we sometimes are the bad guy in the story. We sometimes are the villain. We sometimes are the problem. We don't want to think of ourselves in that way. We don't want to think of ourselves as the problem or the villain. We have a hard time being the bad one in the story. But I want you to consider sometimes you do have to raise a little hell. Even Jesus turned some tables in the Bible. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you do have to raise a little hell. Be okay with your inner villain. You have that person anyways. Might as well use it for your own integrity, for your own values, etc. Right? So what do you say in the matter? And how do you want things to turn out? A lot of times that question is very liberating because you didn't even consider that you had a say in the matter. This is what happened to me when I was diagnosed with cervical cancer in my 20s, and I went to look at to get some counsel from my pastor, and she said, "What conversation are we having? Are you choosing to live or are you choosing to die? Because if you're choosing the I want to live conversation, then all this fear and oh my God, I'm putting my affairs in order is completely irrelevant and unaligned with I'm going to live. And if you're choosing to die, then the conversations about alternative therapies and planning for a future also irrelevant because you're getting ready to head out. So you have to pick a lane in order for you to get your focus right, and so that your actions and your words and your thoughts can be aligned with a particular result." I didn't know that I had a say in the matter. That blew my mind and forever changed the trajectory of my life. Because if I can have a say about cancer, what else can I have a say about? And so I want to open it up for us to discuss this. There's a time when not looking at external forces minimizes the impact of systemic existence. We don't live in a vacuum. We live in a society. We live in a culture. We live in propaganda. We live in a specific moment in history, right? That there are some things that are available to you today because it isn't 1776. There are some things that are available to you today as a woman of color, because it isn't 1952. Right? So we have to be conscious of, not only do we live in a society and a culture, but we also live in a specific moment of time where there are things that are available, there are things that are not available. And that they are available doesn't mean that you're entitled to them. And that they're not available doesn't mean that you're not entitled to them. Right? We just distance yourself from it is what it is, or there's nothing I can do about it. Florence, you have your hand up. I want to hear what you have to say. Come on up.
Yes. Oh, this is so relevant a conversation, pertinent, whatever you might say. Oh my God. I don't even know where to start, but I'm that person with that experience of being 7 and having to become like a mother, like a caretaker or a protector for my parents. I mean, become for both of them. Like one, I feared one would kill the other. And I loved both of them, but I feared that my dad would probably do something very bad to my mom. And then I love my mom, and I didn't like the way that she spoke to my dad, and and all of this. But anyway, I felt like it's somewhere inside of me. I said they were both acting like kids, so I became like a little mother trying to correct the situation and all of this and all of this. And so it ended me up with all these assumptions. I have no one to depend on. I'm, all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up now, and I had a child, and the relationship between my daughter and I, not surprisingly, has been extremely contentious, and it has been so bad.
Did
And
you parentify her as well, or did you go the opposite way and infantilize her?
no, could not. I was not available, it seems, for her.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it.
And just because, and then it's only like a few weeks ago now. I'm 66.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've had this painful experience with my daughter because I got her when I was 22.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've come to discover that I could not forgive or let go of the fact that nobody was there for me.
Mm-hmm.
I had the resentment against my mom. My mom is passed, but I saw her in a dream a few weeks ago. And I saw how dejected and like she felt unappreciated. She's just sitting there feeling so sad and depressed. And then it came to me that I needed to have compassion for this woman who couldn't be like, a lot of, because I have all the information now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a bit about her situation. So now I'm able like to have that compassion. And do you know that it has begun to shift the terrible, like the relationship that I've had with my daughter.
Yes, I
And
believe
oh
it.
my God, this is just like, oh God, it's absolutely
Healing.
amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yes.
totally believe it. There's something to be said about passing on cycles in family lineages, and then there's some people who just become the ones that stop it. Let's stop that cycle. That begin a different trajectory in the conversation around this is just how it's done. This is how I grew up. You should be able to handle it because I handled it, and I turned out okay. And
Yeah.
a lot of times we say those things through our trauma. We don't even see it, right? It's like when you're wearing blue glasses. You think everything is a shade of blue. You have no idea. That's like, no, that's not a light blue car. That's white. But
Yeah.
because you have blue glasses on, you think it's light blue because you don't see everything in the shade of blue.
Yeah.
And
That
so
is
we,
what I used to say to my daughter. Oh, like in my mind, I felt, okay, I went through difficulties, even though I had a father and mother, they weren't really there for me. And you don't have a father, but you have me. So you can get through it and this and that and all of that. And,
yeah,
and the child used to be, oh Lord, she used to be trying to say to me, oh, like, who are you to tell me when to let go or when to forgive or when to whatever, like this. And my heavens, it's been
and so
hellish.
the conversation that sometimes that you've heard me say that sometimes we're having a conversation here, but we're having
Yeah.
a conversation underneath the conversation. And that's
Yes.
the one that sometimes goes unacknowledged, but it's the more important one because it's the tectonic plate that actually makes the movement in the relationship. And the conversation that I hear in what you just shared with your daughter is for you are so used to denying your own needs
Yes.
that you
Absolutely.
weren't even available to acknowledge other people's needs,
Right.
how close they were to you being your daughter, for example. So
Yes.
that's very, very powerful. Thank you so much for presencing that. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I saw Rashida, and then is that Cece? Who's that Samsung? Rashida, your hand up.
Yes,
It's me, CC too.
Cece, okay. Listen, Cece's on video, so we're gonna get to you, child, before we have.
thank you so much, Dr. Ogando.
Yes.
And I took away a lot from this presentation. It's so interested, and why I want to piggyback on your experience when you went to the doctor and they say, oh, you have surgery. Did you buy on it? you were like, okay, what story I want to run with, what story I want to write, and what alternative I want to go with. And this is one of the things that I will instill in my family members, close friend, how much we want to write a story, or how much we want to hear what we want to hear and not follow what it is good for you. And why I say that is because if you was just writing your story and not listening to someone else's opinion or someone else's idea, would you be here telling us your story? Right. So this is the most important part I took away from this whole spectrum of the half an hour of the daily huddle. How much we want to write our story. And pointing finger, how much is pointing back to you? Just be conscious of this fulfillment of writing a good story, a story that you can pass on and leave a legacy. And thank you so much for your story. I really appreciate you pinpointing and be brave enough to really say, I did this, or I didn't want to hear the doctor is saying this, and the doctor says to you, what it is that you want to do.
That wasn't the doctor, honey. The doctor said you had a year to live. If I listened to him, we wouldn't be here today. That was my pastor.
Okay, so you see that you went a different road, you want to write a story, your story, not somebody else's story. And this is so deep for me to take away this morning. Thank you so much for being honest and being transparent.
You are so welcome. You are so welcome. Thank you, Rashida. Somebody says in the chat, that's amazing. Cece, come on up. Somebody said in the chat, therapy on steroids. Thank you, Laura. This is a beautiful platform that allows humans to experience each other in a safe container. It matters to have a safe space to speak about your vulnerabilities among experts that are invested in shedding light on those dark areas. Thank you, Daisy. That's amazing. And she's a breast cancer survivor as well, so this is powerful. All right, here, this is the family of badasses, so I'm not surprised, Daisy. Cece, what you got? And thank you for coming on video. Every time you're on, it's like you're on a treadmill somewhere, so I'm excited. This is a happy day for me.
Well, I want to thank you so much for the topic, because that conversation that goes in your subconscious mind is what's really running the show. Yes. So once, that's from experience. And so once I started changing the narrative that in my thinking, my life started changing to the better. Yes. And I'm grateful, and not shifting blame on anybody, and being responsible for my own thinking, and that I think well and healthy all the time. So thank you so much for being so vulnerable. And I'm going to be vulnerable more so now, because that's where I've been set free. And people want to know your story, your real story, not the fake story, like everything's well, and it isn't. So it gets better every day. So I pass with that. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to say something about vulnerability that now that you guys are bringing that up, especially with your point, Cece, about the subconscious. I have a program that all of my private clients have access to, a program called Upgrade Your Subconscious, because it's part of the work that we do in our coaching for you to upgrade your subconscious. And then there are people who's like, ooh, I can't afford to work with you, Dr. Monikah, so can I just get the Upgrade Your Subconscious? And you can do that too for a couple $100. And so, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because there is a loop. Imagine that you live in a rural area and you get in your tractor every day and you go down the road to start plowing the field, etc. If you do that enough times, eventually you develop grooves on the land, and you can almost take your hand off of the tractor and it'll drive itself, because you've already created grooves where you have driven this tractor to the land day in and day out, day in and day out. And the same thing happens with our subconscious mind and with our mindset, is that you're so used to thinking a particular way, jumping to a particular conclusion, interpreting events and personalities in a particular way, that even though there are 1,000 different ways to get from your house to the land using that tractor, we're not even changing the the ingredients. We're just changing the delivery mechanism. Even though there's 1,000 ways to get there, you still go the way you've gone because that's the way you're used to. And then when somebody goes a different way or moves the tractor to a different facility or a different road, it feels uncomfortable, even though it's smoother because there are less grooves. Even though, let me just say that again, I know that we're over time, but even though it is a smoother ride and will get you there faster, you tend to, not you specifically, but we as in the human condition, we tend to go back to the thing that is uncomfortable, not because we want comfort, but because we want what's familiar, even if the familiar is painful. Does that make sense? And so what I want to say to you, Laura says, my takeaway is, how do we accept the fact that we are the cause of our experience? Now, the thing that I want you to walk away with is this particular distinction, that there are forces beyond your control that influence the experience that you are having. What you are at cause for is how you interpret those experiences. You may not be responsible for the rain. You may not be responsible for a war. You may not be responsible for political movements, not individually and solely anyways. You may be part of a larger collective consciousness, that's true. But individual cause, you're not. Let's not aggrandize our responsibilities either. But what you are a cause for is what you say it means about you and to you. That is in your realm of causation. And so as we move from today's episode of the Daily Huddle, I want you to start thinking about, what do I say this means about me and to me in a conscious way? You are already doing it. You are already navigating the world, interpreting it in a particular way, based on the grooves in your subconscious, based on your family history, based on your biography, based on your race, based on your gender, based on your generation, based on your culture, based on a lot of things that are outside of you. You're already doing that. All I'm asking you to do is to become more conscious of your authorship, of your creatorship, and to ask yourself deliberately and cognitively, what do I want it to mean about me and to me? So that you can declare that, so that you can create that, so that you can be consciously choosing that. Just like my pastor 20-something years ago said, which conversation are you having? And it wasn't until she articulated that I was aware of, let alone gave myself permission to have options, to have choices, and to then choose the choice that elevated my life. Thank you so much for being here, for staying past our 30-minute mark. I appreciate you. Remember to love generously, laugh, rest, get at least 7 hours of sleep, exercise, eat more plant-based, stress less, give of yourself, your time, your energy, your attention, your love, your talent, your everything. And of course, always audit your assumptions. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Don't embarrass yourself out here in these streets. You are part of the Daily Huddle family, and you have an access to mastery that some people don't have. So use it, learn it, pass it on. We love you. See you next time.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Love you all. Thank you.